What do you say we amp up the excitement in today's video and talk about paintbrushes? Now you may be saying, well, what's the big deal about brushes? Brushes are brushes, right? And in a lot of ways, they are. They're just brushes. I mean, when you get right down to it, they're just tools that we use to accomplish other things. And some people like using different tools. You know, it's just like in a wood shop. You've got some folks who like using some brands and some folks who like using others. And some folks have one budget and some folks have others. In the end, you know, as long as it accomplishes what you're wanting, that's the main thing. But I do get enough questions from time to time essentially saying, look, I see all these videos about brushes by mini painters, you know, miniature painters, and I get that, but I'm not a miniature painter. What do I need to know about brushes? So this video is more focused on someone who's not necessarily a miniature painter, but is still wanting to know, how can I get the best brush for the job that I'm trying to do? Now, when you're evaluating brushes, I mean, really what you're talking about is three basic areas. You're talking about performance, durability, and results. And different types of brushes are going to give you different things in that. Going to give you different results in that. So while, you know, a very cheap synthetic may give you good performance, like a very expensive natural brush early on, the durability may not be so good. There's always this kind of slider in there of, you know, you've got cost and you've got performance and durability, and every brush and every brand and every type is going to be somewhere along that continuity. Now, for your own needs, you have to evaluate, well, what do I use them for? When I built aircraft, most of everything that I did was airbrushing. The only time I used a brush was basically to paint instrument dials and a few details in the cockpit, and maybe, you know, for weathering and things like that. And so I had one expectation of my brushes. Now that I'm doing more sci-fi stuff, a lot more brush work, a lot more tabletop gaming stuff, my expectations and needs and everything else from a brush, they're quite different. And so I've started getting brushes based on those needs. So you really have to look at your needs and how the brush's performance, durability, and the final results are going to affect whatever your needs are. One of the basic distinctions when talking about brushes is the type of material the brush itself is made from. Generally, everything's going to be either synthetic or natural. The synthetic brushes can be made from a variety of things, but they're all going to be, you know, some kind of nylon brush. Now, they may have more high quality products that go into it. Some may be softer than others. Some may be slightly different colored, but they're all going to be synthetic, which is going to affect in one way or another the performance. The natural hair brushes, they're going to come from something natural. It's going to be, it may be a sable. It may be some kind of, I mean, there's everything from hog brushes to who knows what kind of critters are used for the various brushes. But those natural hairs, they bring their own set of performance benefits to the table. And so all of that is going to impact how the brushes work. But there's even some distinctions within those categories that I think are important to consider. Now, in terms of synthetics, you've got a fairly wide range of what you can choose from. This one here is one that I got in a pack of like 100 other brushes, and I want to say its total cost is maybe 17 cents, 18 cents, somewhere between those two. It's a very cheap brush, but it has its uses. This is one that I got in a multi-pack from Hobby Lobby, and it's one of those multi-packs where there's, 6 or 7 or 8 brushes in there for $5, $6, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, but they're a little better quality than this, but they're still very, very affordable. This is one that I got individually. It's from AK Interactive. I want to say this one was around $1.50, something like that, $2. So in terms of cost, it wasn't much different from this, but in performance, I think it's a little better. Then I've got these two. This one is from Blick Art, and this one is from Da Vinci. This is Blick Art's Masterclass Golden Taklon series, and this is Da Vinci's Cosmotop Spin. I have no idea what a Cosmotop is or why it would spin, but it's a brand of brushes that they put out. Again, these are synthetics. These are going to perform, they do perform much better than any of these, and the performance of these is designed to be very close to natural hair brushes. So why have so many of these? Now, when it comes to natural hair brushes, there's, again, a wide selection. There's things like these more affordable Army Painter natural hair brushes, and then you've got ones that are more expensive, but the quality of them is much higher. Like this is one from Artis Opus. Here's one from Da Vinci. This is Raphael right here, and this is Winsor & Newton. All of these are top quality natural hair brushes that are going to give you great performance, and if you take care of them, they're going to have very good durability. So here I've got a range of brushes that go from being, less than a couple of dimes right here, less than 20 cents, to some of these being close to $20, between $15 and $20. Yet when you look up here, except for this one that's been a little more used, they all look about the same. The point is about the same, the size is about the same, and for the most part, they're going to generally perform about the same. So what are the distinctions that make you say, well, why shouldn't I just get all of these? Why should I get anything like this or anything in the middle? Now, I think when it comes down to making the decision about which one should I get, in my own painting journey, I discovered this notion, and I'm sure I'm not the first one to discover it, but it was something that became apparent to me, that over time I grew into brushes. Now, what I mean by that was, when I first really got into painting miniatures, to painting tabletop gaming stuff, to really focusing a lot on brush painting rather than just airbrushing 90% of everything I did. When I really got into focusing on brush painting, I originally started with some cheap synthetics, and I got one of these Army Painter brushes, and I got one of these Winsor & Newton brushes. And initially, in that, I didn't really see a difference between them. I tried using all of them, and I painted, and the results that I had from the very cheap brush looked about like the results that I had from the Winsor & Newton brush. But what I was doing was making a bit of an assumption there that was not entirely true. Quite often people will ask me, what airbrush should I use? And one of the questions I ask is, well, how much experience do you have in airbrushing? And if they tell me, well, I've had such and such a brand of airbrush and I've been using it for quite a while and I still haven't figured out how to airbrush things well, I tell them switching brands is not going to necessarily make things better, because there are some other factors that go into airbrushing that are going to make that a successful endeavor for you. And I found that with brush painting, in my own experience, it was the same way. It turns out that I had to grow a bit in understanding how thinning and how loading your brush up and how putting it on the model and how much to put on and a whole lot of factors like that. Those things really made more of a difference in how the brushes ultimately served as a tool than the brush itself. Because at some point I thought, well, I've got this cheap brush and I'm doing okay with it, but as soon as I go to this Winsor & Newton, I'm just going to magically start painting better. And then when that didn't happen, I got a little frustrated, and I should have known better, because I've been, telling the message for years that airbrushing is not necessarily about the airbrush. It's about thinning your paints and air pressure, and it's about keeping track of those fundamentals and getting those right, so that the tool will do the maximum that it can do. And it's the same way with a brush. If you're fairly new to brush painting, then you may not see a whole lot of difference between the cheap brush and the really nice brush. Now, I'm not going to say there's not any difference, but it can vary between individuals because of the way it feels, the way you thin your paints, the way you apply them to the model. Like, for example, I started noticing that the miniature painters that I admired tended to thin their paints a lot more than I did. So I started thinning the paint a lot more. And then I started seeing that they would unload the brush so that what they initially dipped in the paint and what actually made its way to the model would be two different things. And I started seeing that there was much more attention paid to putting on multiple layers that were more thin and building up gradients and being very much in control of the type of paint and even the angle at which the brush was used to touch the model. All of that mattered. And the more I worked on those fundamentals, the more I started seeing, wait a minute, now this kind of mid-range Army Painter natural hair brush is starting to do better for me than this. But it wasn't that the brushes had changed, it was that I had changed. So as with anything else in our hobby, it's really about experience and using the tools correctly and seeking to be focused in your growth in the use of those tools. That's what's going to count. Okay, Mr. YouTuber, so you've made your case that we grow into brushes and they have different uses. How about some practical recommendations? Okay, right here you're looking at about 120 or so brushes. There may be more than that. It started off as 150. I got these in 2 packs off of Amazon. One pack had this type of brush here, this more pointy brush, and then this wider, more dry brush type of brush. And another pack had these liner brushes right here. In total, for all of these brushes, I paid about less than $30. It works out to, I did the math one time, it works out to around 20 cents a brush. I always keep these right here in this big old jar. I keep these handy because I think having really, really, really cheap synthetics are important when you're doing a lot of painting. I use these for putting on washes, for doing dry brushing, for putting on texture paste, for putting on anything where if at the end of the day, even if I pulled it out as a brand new brush and started on it, if whatever I did completely wrecked the brush and I have to throw it in the trash, I'm not too worried about it because it's ultimately a cheap brush. No, it's not going to give me the greatest performance long-term of any brush that's ever been made, but there is going to be great value in the fact that I'm able to use this to do things that are more abusive of the brush itself and not have to sacrifice even my somewhat nicer synthetics. I can just use these, they're cheap and throw away. So if you're wanting to buy brushes and you're wanting to have kind of a deliberate strategy of what you have, there's something to be said for having some very, 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 very cheap synthetics that you know you can throw away, that you don't even think about it for a minute, and that you can get a giant pack of them that's going to last you for a very long time. Now, when it comes to better quality synthetics, I've kind of shifted my thinking over time, but where I'm at now in my own buying, is based on essentially the performance I get out of different types of brushes. Now you can see here, I've got here, this is kind of an amalgamation of several brushes that I got from sets at Hobby Lobby. But if you've been to any art store, you see they usually have a house brand, and usually they're better quality than those cheap brushes that I just showed, but they're not super high quality either. This is another set that I got. It came, I don't even remember what I ordered, but I ordered some other thing to do with modeling, and this came as a free set of brushes with it. And I've used them a few times. I actually got 2 sets of these. I've used them a few times, and they seem to be about like these. Then you've got like these that I'm showing. These are from Da Vinci. This is something that you can get off of Amazon. There's other places I'm sure also, but I find these on Amazon. Now, the difference is a set like this is going to be $5, maybe $10. This was probably, if it would have been sold separately, probably about that. These are $25 to $30. So what's the difference? In my own experience, I find that these nicer synthetics from Da Vinci, from Blick Art, from Rosemary & Co., things like that, those give me better performance over time and have more durability than the much cheaper ones. While these perform better than those ultra cheap ones that I talked about just a few minutes ago, these don't seem to last very long, even when I am very careful with how I use them. So I've gotten to where I no longer really buy these, I call them mid-level cheap brushes, because they just don't have the durability. Whereas these, yeah, they're a little more expensive, but they've had good durability. They perform a lot longer, and I feel like I get more value out of them in the long run than I do with these. Now, when it comes to the high-end natural hair brushes, and I've got examples here from Artis Opus, Da Vinci, Raphael, and Winsor & Newton. There's others, of course. There's Broken Toad. Blick puts out a really good natural hair brush that's easily available here in the U.S. There's lots of other brands that are very high quality. Rosemary & Co. Is one of them. So there's plenty of natural hair brushes that you'll hear about. And if you've watched very many miniature painters on the tubes of you've seen that some will favor one brush over another. You know, they'll only use maybe Rosemary & Co. or the Raphael or the Winsor & Newton or the whatever, Artis Opus. You'll see them exclusively using those. Now, I'm not saying that there's not a difference between these, but if you're like me, if you're more of a mere mortal painter, I use these, and they all just work really, really nice for me. I haven't developed in my skill to the point where I can say, okay, I prefer this brand over this brand for this reason. I'm still at a point where they all work really well. I say that to say, if you've not used natural hair brushes and you feel like you're wanting to grow in your skills and your painting and you're wanting the performance that they can offer, then pick a brush from someone who you respect. Pick a brand that they use, and also pick a brand that's easily available to you. Here in the U.S., it can be really hard to get some brushes like Rosemary & Co. Because of a ban on sable brushes or something that I don't quite understand. Rosemary & Co. won't sell to people in the U.S., and I understand and respect that. Other manufacturers in Europe, if you order from them, they don't seem to worry about it. So if I'm ordering from here in the U.S., I can get it from some brands but not others, but then I have to pay the shipping. But then there's places here in the U.S. that sell them, and the shipping is not as much. So the cost certainly and the availability are important, but just pick a starting point and say, okay, well, I see this person using this brush, and I respect the work they do. I like the work that they do. So I'm going to give that a try. And then, maybe later on, if you have the opportunity to try another brand, then give that a try and see what you think of it. But for the most part, if you're wanting to get a really nice sable brush, any of those high quality, top quality brands that you see miniature painters and others using on the internet, those are going to be good ones to start with. They're all going to deliver great performance and will help you grow in your painting. Let's just talk some practical things for just a moment. What's the difference between this Da Vinci Cosmotop Spin synthetic brush and this Da Vinci Maestro? It's one of their Series 35, which is one of their very top-end natural hair brushes. What's the real difference? It all comes down to how paint flows off of a synthetic hair versus a natural hair. Now, I'm not a scientist. I don't even wear a lab coat. But people what are smarter than me have told me, and I've seen quite a few sources talk about this, in non-modeling sources, true artists, in terms of, painting on canvas, the kind of person you think of as an artist. Not that I'm saying modeling is an art. Anyway, another video. But the synthetic hairs, they hold the paint differently. They're very smooth. The individual nylon bristles are very smooth, whereas natural hair has some texture to it, and so it holds the paint better, and it flows off of the brush generally better. So the real difference is how the paint flows off the brush. Now, depending on the thinning of the paint, the type of paint, the type of synthetic brush versus natural brush that you're using, the difference can be very, very small. But this is what I was talking about earlier when I talk about growing into it. As you grow into a type of brush and you're able to take advantage of, hey, we got a visitor, and you're able to take advantage of what the performance of the brush is, then how the paint flows off of it is going to be very, very important. So that's why this is going to perform a little different than this, and we can take advantage of that. Yet there's still a good cause for using this, because if you're just needing to base paint a model, this is a much better option to do that, because you're just rough painting with it and you're not necessarily doing anything that's going to be too damaging to it, but it is just good brush care for your natural hair brushes to have some of these standing by so that you're not using this necessarily for everything. Now, I've probably made all of this sound way too complicated, but, that's just what I do. So what can I say to kind of conclude? I like to have a whole bunch of these really, really, really cheap brushes handy to make sure that when I'm doing any kind of task that I can have this, and if it's going to be destructive to the brush, I can use these and not worry about it. I've kind of moved away from the cheap art store kind of brushes, the packs of those, because I find that the performance between those and the ultra cheap ones isn't that much difference to make it worth having, so I don't really get those anymore. I do get the synthetic brushes from the bigger brush manufacturers. Again, the Da Vinci's, the Blick Art, Rosemary & Co., things like that, because I find that there is a performance difference there that I like using for general painting, and they clean fairly easy, and they're fairly durable, and they give me good performance over a longer period of time. And then I have, of course, some natural hair brushes that are very high quality that I'm starting to use more and more as I start learning to blend better, to do more advanced painting techniques, and basically get the most effective use I can out of my brushes. Now, having said all of that, you will find examples of some painters, high-end miniature painters and others, who you'll find some that only use the very cheap brushes. They use them, they paint with them for one day maybe, and then they throw it away and they grab another out of a box of 500. So some people use nothing but the really cheap brushes. Others, they stick completely to the very high-end brushes, and that's fine too. And then you'll find others who do everything in between. All of this is going to have to be tailored to fit your needs. But for my needs, I've found that it's just a good strategy to have the very cheap ones and then some good synthetics from good brush manufacturers, and then a few natural hair brushes that I really take care of, but I'm going to get the most use out of them I can. Now, just a brief note on brush care: you'll get longer life out of any type of brush if you care for it. That's another video on how to care for it. But keep your brushes clean. Wash them off after use. Use some of the brush soap that works really well. Sometimes I just use some dish soap to clean off, especially my synthetics. Don't let the paint go all the way up the bristles into the metal part, which is called the metal part. Don't let the paint go all the way up into that, because that's going to give you problems. So like sometimes I use these cheap brushes here just to stir my paints, because I know that that's going to get paint all up in them, and I don't have to worry about it being done on the other brushes. But caring for your brushes, regardless of what level they're at in terms of cost, is going to extend the life greatly. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this video. If nothing else, you've discovered that a hobby of mine is collecting brushes. So I love trying them out. That's why I have so many brands and so many varieties. I always get one or two of just about every brand I can get my hands on, just because I like trying brushes. So I really like them. But thank you for watching this video. I know it's been quite boring, but hey, I needed to crank a video out. I think this is an important topic, and not everything we can do in our hobby is going to be really exciting. Sometimes there's just some practical information that can be helpful. You know the routine. There's a subscribe button down over here. Hit the little bell icon. Drop a comment down below. Give it a like. I'd be most grateful if you do that. There is a link down below for Patreon. If you'd like to support the work that I do on this channel, please click that link and consider supporting me on Patreon. And if you're already supporting me on Patreon, number one, I need to apologize, because you've seen most of this in Patreon vlogs already over the last year or so. So I apologize if this is kind of redundant for you, but I thought it was important to answer in the YouTube format. But thank you for being a patron and for supporting the work that I do. It is a blessing to me, and it's a blessing to my family, and it's not lost on me. The support you give us really does make the difference for us, and I know it's a sacrifice for you. So I thank you for that, and I hope that you're enjoying the benefits you get as a patron. And with all that being said, as I stand here waving my hands over a mound of paintbrushes, I'll leave you with one final thought, as I always like to do. In this hobby, if you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Happy day to you, friends. Bye-bye.